Well, the push for Australia to lift the ban on nuclear energy has ramped up this week, with former federal Treasurer Peter Costello throwing his support behind nuclear to provide a new domestic energy source and to help reduce carbon emissions. It comes as new figures show nuclear is the second most preferred electricity source after solar, beating out wind farms. Joining me now is Nuclear for Australia founder Will Shackle. Will, this endorsement by Peter Costello really just adds more pressure on the government, doesn't it?
Well, I think importantly, people from all sides of politics support nuclear energy, whether it's Peter Costello or the majority of Q&A's audience, 59%, who say they supported nuclear energy when I was on that program, or even going as far as individuals within the Labor Party and also people who vote for the Labor Party, a majority of them also supporting nuclear energy. So it's clear that regardless of your politics, most Australians support nuclear energy, and that's incredibly encouraging to see.
We'll look at some figures in just a moment, but do you think there's going to be a change in government policy? I mean, obviously the tide is turning. Is it turning enough that in this term or going into the next election you think Labor would change their minds on this issue, or are they set in stone against it?
Well, I'm really hopeful and optimistic that the majority of Australians do support nuclear energy, including those who are supporting their government. So I really do hope that they look at the science, look at the facts that are resoundingly clear about nuclear energy, know it is the most, and get back on track to reaching our emissions targets, because currently we're not on track to reach them. I think that we should have a framework where we are considering all options on the table, and I think that has to include nuclear energy. At the moment, unfortunately, our politicians are ignoring the will of the people. They're ignoring the science, ignoring the global evidence of nuclear being an effective pathway to net zero. But if they're going to open their minds up to all of those facts and to all of that evidence, I hope that they'll therefore change their mind and make their first priority to lift the ban on nuclear energy.
Well, I mentioned in the opening that there's new figures from Radiant Energy. They did a survey of people across 20 countries. I'll show you a graph of the results. And as you'll see on this graph, nuclear has strong support. That's nuclear in the pink. Solar is in the yellow. Now, that's the favourite source for people. But it shows that there's not much opposition to nuclear, certainly not as much as was once thought. Let me give you another graph here. And that shows that more people support using nuclear rather than opposing it. In Australia alone, 41% support using nuclear compared to 36% against. So, as you said earlier, it definitely shows people's attitudes are starting to turn. They're starting to realise it is a cheap form of energy and it's not as dangerous as they've been made out to believe. Do you remember, Will, when Adam Bandt talked about nuclear submarines would be a Chernobyl just off the coast of Australia. And so you can imagine people getting fearful of nuclear reactors in this country. But people are starting to dismiss that sort of fear-mongering, aren't they?
They certainly are. And I think one of the most important and telling statistics within that survey was the fact that when people were asked if Australia was to focus on one energy source, which one they should focus on, 23% said nuclear, whilst only 15% said wind, which technically means that wind is less popular than nuclear energy, which I think is really incredible statistic. From my point of view, we should be embracing all clean energy options in order for us to get to net zero, and importantly, to make sure that we keep electricity bills down and energy reliable at the same time. But Australians are certainly not buying into the
I think we've lost Will there. He's on holidays on the Sunshine Coast and we've lost him. But I tell you what, that young man, he's 17 years old. He's had a huge year. He was at the climate conference in Dubai. He got an exclusive interview with the French president that went worldwide. Dick Smith's thrown his support behind him. So I don't know what you do when you've peaked at age 17, but he's having incredible influence and he makes a lot of sense as well.